Okay, welcome everybody. Congratulations, you made it to the first session. I guess everybody flew in. You made it to the best session. I'm just kidding. We're going to talk about fintech to core integration. So everybody know what I mean by core? So a banking core, right? So every bank has this system. It's like SAP for the manufacturing world. They have these systems. And if you're writing a cool fintech app, at the end of the day, you got to connect there. And so that's the problem we're going to address. I think a lot of what we're applying could be applied to other integration, other kind of problems, but that's a key one that we're going to focus on. So I'm Kent Brown. I'm a co-founder and CTO of PortX. And that really, we specialize in integration for really focused totally on banks and enabling fintechs to connect to banks. That's our main focus. We also do some payments. We're integrated to the Federal Reserve. We can provide wires and ACH and that kind of thing. And then Juan is a staff engineer at PortX, and he focuses on actually one of the things we're going to demo is we were calling it Open Banking API, but really it's more of an Open Core API, so we renamed it. So we'll talk about that. So his team is focusing on designing and building out that against all the cores in the world. So the agenda is kind of broken down. There's going to be several steps. And really, it's meant as a workshop. There's not going to be a ton of heavy coding, but we're going to let you look at code and interact with code and explore it. I figured making it into a lab would be a bit much, understanding whether your background's exactly in the tools we use. So I'm going to kind of set out the problem, connecting to all the cores in the world. If you're a fintech, you kind of need to do that, or focus on the top 10 or whatever. I'm going to look at the architecture that we've used to support that, and as well as a tech stack. Being DevCon, the goal here is not a product pitch. Like, we're sharing what we're doing, but everything we're going to show here is open source. You could do yourself. We'll highlight here and there. Try not to be heavy-handed about it, about how we help with that, but these are tools you can use. And then, we're just going to show this Orca is the name of this API. We're going to kind of go through that. We're going to explore one way of building those APIs with Apache Camel, which is an open source integration framework. We're going to show a little bit about deploying this into our environment, how we do that. We take a very opinionated, cloud-native DevOps role, and so we're going to kind of show how that can work. And then we're just going to show exploring a web app that's built to consume that API and just play around with it, just show a little bit about the security and how it consumes those APIs. How many people are developers? I figured most people, because at the conference it seemed like about a third were developers and the rest were everybody else, I guess. We will be showing code and we'll let you interact, look through it, and we'll open up the code repos. It's not necessarily you're going to have to code anything to succeed at the lab. It's more of just seeing the code. Okay, so you've built a cool app. Maybe it's a loan origination. It's online, account opening. Maybe you've got a cool online banking solution, a lot of up and coming. We tend to call fintechs anybody who's providing some kind of cool solution and needs to connect into a bank and solve their problems. So that's awesome, and especially if you're just starting out, if you're a startup, and we actually work with several fintech startups like this. That integration problem is real, and how do you do that? And if your specialty is loan origination, your specialty is making the user experience, do you really want to hire the team out that can do this integration to all the cores, right? And if you do, how do you go about that? So again, I'm going to show you, if you do want to do, some really good ideas how to go about that, and then I'll highlight here and there how we could help. So as you want to connect the core, our kind of demo app here, we'll call it Pay Now, and let's say it's a payment app, and you're moving money in and out. It's fictitious. As you look at the code in the demo, it's not going to be perfect. Like, this is not a real live app. It's representative. But the problem you have is I've got to connect. I want to grow. I've got investors. They expect me to double and triple and every year. How do I connect to all the different banks? Because every bank you walk into, there are 30 cores out there. That's the long tail. There's probably more, like roughly 30, but there's probably like 10 that would get you 80 or 90% of the market. Even that's is a big deal. So you've got about 8 or 10 vendors. Probably you guys have heard of Jack Henry, FIS, Fiserv, and Astra. A lot of them, like Fiserv, have bought up. They have many, 7 or 8 cores you got to connect to. So that can be a challenge. Here are some of the challenges, excuse me. You've got to, a lot of times, establish relationship with the vendors. Some of the vendors are pretty cagey and they're protective of the core and how they want to integrate, or maybe expensive. They're all doing the same basic work, but their domain models, how they represent their data, can be different. They have varying API styles, is really, like a lot of them are still, we'll call it plain old XML, right? It's just connecting over HTTPS or even some on TCP/IP. Anybody got an example of the weirdest core? I don't know if you guys connected to cores, or, but we definitely have had one where it's XML over TCP. Sometimes it's just asynchronous files over something like SFTP. I'd say more of the ones built like in the 90s and the first, first 10 years of the 2000s are SOAP-based, and then recent ones, you're starting to get REST-based ones. But anyway, it's a broad range, and so if you're going to integrate with each of them, you've got to have integration experts that take their time to learn that core, to translate whatever data you need to consume into the common format you're going to do, so it can be a pain. So our answer to that, again, we used to call it open banking, but really we're partnered now or we're part of FDX, which is really an open banking standard, and so we're trying to be careful not to misuse the word open banking. So we call it Open Reusable Core API. The difference is FDX, you guys familiar with that? That's a standard for open banking. They're really focused on outside talking into the bank. They're really focused on minimal data sets and minimal sets of functionality. We're trying to, over time, we're not complete there, we're trying to do everything a core can do. So it's almost more like an internal API that would just give a generic connection into the core. And so things like online banking, account opening, any kind of account management, payments, loan origination, credit cards. We'll show a little bit later the list. And so we've built those as easy RESTful APIs, tried to do the main core things that not just the fintech, but also the bank internally would use. And then one of the things that might be different even than FTX, we really took an ISO 20022 focus. It's not that it's strictly all the message types, but all the semantic, the names and the meaning of the different fields. We tried to align with that, and some of the codes and the enums that you can use, mainly to simplify the mapping to and from, because more and more wires, ACH, SWIFT, they're going that direction. So FedNow, exactly. So that's basically how it does. And then, so we'll share today, you'll see our spec over time. We haven't officially made it open, but we probably will. We're not charging for the API definition. I think the guys next door are doing some kind of similar kind of things, more of the open banking. So there'll probably be a lot of people that have APIs. We'll offer ours as an option, meaning here's the defined way to talk into the core. What we've seen work for fintechs that have to, so down below I'm showing all the cores, but imagine each of those was a different bank you're connecting to. So this bank's using CSI, this one's using Jack Henry. And so we would make these lower level API connectors, that's what we're doing, that implement this, what we call the Orca API, and then we have a routing layer that implements the same API. And so then as a fintech, you're able to connect your app to a single endpoint with a single API, right? And then just with a header switch between which bank it is. And we've got those wired together securely. And you could do the same thing. So I'm not just trying to say what we're doing. That way, your application is talking, but then depending on who's logged in, based on a header, you can redirect that call to the appropriate bank, which is implementing the exact same API, and then the connector down there will talk to that bank's core and return the data. So again, you can write your application once and know that it'll work across many banks. So then as you add to those connectors, towards the long tail, maybe it takes some work to build that last connector, but it allows you to connect all the banks that use that connector. I will just put a qualifier there that different banks use course, differently. They're going to tweak and maybe use the data slightly different. So there can be some tweaks to the data mapping, but you're going to get at least 90% there, and then go tweak rather than rewriting that from scratch every time. Okay, so does that make sense? Feel free to interrupt if there are questions. So that's the architectural approach. What's the tech stack to make that work? This is the goals that we took. You don't have to, but I suggest these are pretty good goals in the modern world. The first is cloud native. That can be an overused term, but it really means containerized. Pretty much to me, it's kind of synonymous with Kubernetes. It doesn't have to be, but that you're thinking about how to scale this, how to deploy it in a rigorous way, how to be able to scale, to have reliability. Kubernetes helps with the orchestration. If you have a single instance that fails, it'll start up another one. You can scale it out, right? And so having that reliability that you get from cloud native, and that forces you to design stateless and containerized. And so at scale, if you're going to run a bunch of APIs, you want to. That was where we started. Ideally, as a startup, again in this open source mindset, you'd like to be cloud agnostic and not tied too tightly to a particular cloud. That's always easier said than done. Sometimes you end up using the sources, but as you'll see, our design is at least your code is not dependent on a particular cloud. And obviously highly available, secure, and then open source. And part of why open source is to control costs, but it's also the portability. So I'll touch on that. Especially fintechs, we've really found working that want to drive their own destiny, don't want to too early take too many dependencies on some kind of proprietary expensive technology that's going to be hard to move off of. And so the approach is by using open source, at least you know that there's a no license version of all these things to at least get started. And if a particular vendor were helping you host or had services that were helpful, at least your code's depending on things. You could take it elsewhere. You're portable, right? You're not locked in. And so just some examples. Building out your APIs. Actually, that's the easiest one because most languages are portable. Apache Camel, which we're going to show, is an open source framework. Flowable is we use for workflow. It's another open source thing. Data Sonnet is actually for data transformation. How do you do those mappings? We have a language that we actually contributed, and now Camel has adopted. And then, obviously, most of these are obvious: Open API Spec, Kubernetes and Docker, Argo CD, Istio. But really, the main point here, and we'll get a little bit more into some of these and why they're valuable. The main point is your code is only depending on open source or standards like OIDC or OAuth, right? So you're not locked in. Yes?
So you mentioned secure, and then you highlighted Keycloak. What other ways are you addressing security? APIs and security seem to be like a...
Yeah, it's a hot thing. So part of that is the Kubernetes architecture that we use, and maybe I'll be able to highlight, how, like if you want to, as a developer in your dev environment, not in your prod environment, be able to VPN in exactly to the level and debug, that should be done very securely. But mostly you want a bastion, so the way you set it up that it's really hard to even get access to the API, so that's one way. Actually, I'll highlight it later, but security, vulnerability, pen testing, all of those things. Kubernetes has come a long way in the last 4 or 5 years because people used to say, can I really run it in production? Is it secure? And I think at first a lot of people naively stood it up, but there's been so much focus and improvement on that it's you can do it securely.
Vulnerabilities. Oh, remember the thing.
Oh yeah, sorry, I'm getting off the camera. He's probably having to chase me. Sorry. So yes, thank you. So I'm just going to go through a few things you're going to want to do and some of this technology. So how do you design APIs? That's pretty straightforward. Open API specification. We're going to show some of the output of a couple of frameworks where you can take that and generate, online, like a dev portal. That's pretty straightforward nowadays. For development, again, at the end of the day with Kubernetes, if it's Dockerized, you can deploy, and we support pretty much anything, if it's Python or Node.js or whatever. Apache Camel just happens to be good at integration, so we use that a lot. And yeah, mainly because it's got connectors to different things. It's got the threading. It's got back pressure. Some of the things that you might run into needing if you're doing asynchronous, like if you're doing queuing and things like that. Not that you couldn't build all that, and there are components in other languages as well. For building, we're just pretty much anybody using anything besides GitHub, I guess like GitLab and a few things like that, but it just seems like GitHub to me is just the way to go. With GitHub Actions makes it really good. And yeah, and then for deployment, I'll talk in a second about GitOps. Is everybody familiar with that term, GitOps? The idea is nothing, there's no, and I think it's now common knowledge, but there's no manual configuring of any servers, of any deployments, of anything. Everything's scripted, everything's in code or in text in a GitHub repo. And then, so Argo is one of those tools with Kubernetes that you can have an agent watching your GitHub repo, so you make a check-in and that gets deployed. Some of the reasons for that is just, you can roll back. If you screw up the deployment, you can roll it back and immediately revert to what was running. You can use branch protection and pull requests, right? And you can get a lot of auditing and control over who's allowed to deploy to production, who did it. So that's why we recommend it. And we found Argo CD. We were using Flux before, which was also pretty good, but Argo, especially the modern version, the latest version, it's just really flexible and the UI is great, so we'll demo that. Finally, I think it's finally, the security, we took a very Kubernetes approach, very cloud-native approach to the security. We don't have a separate gateway. We're just using the ingress controller. Istio is actually very powerful there. So we'll show a little bit about how we configure role-based access to the APIs in Kubernetes. And then observability, that's a hot topic. There's stacks that we were using. What's the ELK or EFK was really good. We were going to base it on that, and all of a sudden they're not open source anymore, right? So, especially for a vendor like us, they wouldn't let us do it. So Grafana is. Hopefully it stays that way. So we've been able to go from several third-party applications that were fairly expensive to a single unified plane that's open source and really does well. Can do everything from log searching and management to metrics and dashboarding and distributed tracing, which I'll show, and alerts around errors. So this is a summary of that stack. I won't re-highlight since I got into it. Probably the only piece I'll add is the backing services. If you're trying to be open source, AWS and I think Azure for the most part, but especially AWS has databases like Postgres, MySQL. They have hosted Redis and Kafka. So you can actually, even though you're using cloud vendors, you can maintain that open source kind of principle in terms of you're connecting to things that you could stand it up on your own if you need to, or you could start that and then move to the cloud when and if you need to. Okay, so this is my very short commercial. So the hard parts here is tying all of that together. That all works, and if you've done it or you've experienced it, it ties together. Getting all those pieces stood up and integrated, takes a team of at least several experts. So having that out of the box, just up and go and test it, and that it's done will save time. The uptime of the infrastructure, the maintenance, because those stacks will evolve. The version of Istio, the version of Kubernetes, all those things will evolve. So having that managed, how do you do the vulnerability patching? And actually, we do that not just for the underlying, but also for the containers. If we're supporting your APIs, we can actually do the patching or help coordinate that. VPNs connecting into every different bank has a different standard, different picky thing. They want to do this or that. How do you get the tenants isolated so that let's say as a fintech, you can connect to each of them, but they're not worried that someone's going to connect across or they're going to have cross-pollination. So how do you get that networking right? And then all the SOC 2 kind of things, pen testing, data privacy. Hopefully single sign-on federation for them to log in and see what's going on. So you can, if they're going to Okta or Azure or Google, being able to support that. Being able to get support of the integrations themselves, so either someone on your team needs to do or if your vendor provides it. Moving more towards, and everything I'm showing today is kind of the raw Kubernetes, the hands-on programmer mode, and probably most of you guys are comfortable, but that can be a lot for some people to take on. And so we're moving towards low-code tooling for a lot of that, and then templatizing and even helping you to implement tests. So, all right, that's the end of the commercial. So at the end of the day, you've got this cluster there. Your APIs are, basically Argo is watching your GitOps repo, and has configuration that's pointed to your container registry. Your developers are building things. Once they check it in, you've got an automated build, dropping containers, that gets deployed, and then your management tools to view and monitor. So that's the end goal. So then what we're going to do now is move on to some demos around this. So the demo architecture we're going to do, we're not going to try to show 30 banks. We've got like 2 banks. There's the Mambu bank and the CSI bank. Mambu, I don't know if people have heard of that. That's kind of an up-and-coming, fresh, API-driven core. They're kind of new in the US market, so you probably won't run into a ton of them yet in the banks, but we were partnered with them and have a sandbox. So that's one easy one, and then CSI is another one that's actually pretty popular in the tier of banks that we work with. So we have connectors built to both of those to this consistent open reusable, so Orca, that API, and then we've implemented this routing layer. So we're going to show a sample app talking to that routing layer, and you're going to be able to choose, do I want to talk to the Mambu? We're going to pretend that every customer has an account at both banks, and so you're going to be able to send money back and forth between each core and see what happened. Okay, everything makes sense? Any big questions that making sense so far? So what I'm going to do is hand it off to Juan to show. He's going to show a little bit about that API definition and actually show you how to get the Postman. Oh, we didn't pass out the cards yet, did we?
Not yet.
I'll do that while you start.
Okay.
Sorry, let me do it real quick. So these cards, basically it's just got a URL to a GitHub repo that's got the code, and then the name here is a fictitious made-up name that you're going to use to kind of log in, because if you send money to each other, so each one has their own account. So. Sorry. Oh, I'm not a good dealer. Hey, look. Ninja style. I think I guessed exactly right.
Thanks, Leo.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, first of all, welcome everyone. Glad to be among fellow developers here. Excited that we have a dedicated conference for developers in fintech. So let's move into the more hands-on section of the session, workshop. So the first thing I want to make sure is that everybody that will like to be hands-on, following the cards that you just received, can access the GitHub repo. After that, there is a link to the API. So when everybody's at that page, smile.
You maybe show that there's a README. Once you get that repo, if you go to the README, it'll have all the links.
Yeah. So in that card, you should have access to this repo, and down here, the first link would navigate you there. We're going to go over a couple more things in this README, but let's jump to the API docs. As well, this is an open source tool, Docusaurus, Docly, so you could use any of the many API documentation tools out there. Fern is another great one that allows you to create SDKs if you would like to on top of your REST APIs. So our goal, number one goal here is to make this developer friendly. At the end of the day, if developers don't find it friendly, they wouldn't adapt the API, and it will make our lives a bit trickier on our day-to-day jobs, right? So we want it to be friendly. There's some highlights here of how it looks like. One of the main use cases is usually opening a bank account. So for that, we have to first create a, depending on the core, they might call it a customer, they might call it a name. In our API Orca, we're calling it a person. So here you have to create a person first. In this case, you see the response for that. Following creating a person, then you will have to create an account for that person. And then the way that we relate that is with the party ID. So that party ID is that person's ID. And this is at the most simple level. You could have, instead of a person, you could have an organization. So we have that distinction. A lot of cores, sometimes they just call it a customer and they deal with them both. So we try to make it friendly, make it more human. And in this case, we're just handling the person use case, but in the parties array that you see here, we could have a set of different party types. It could be an organization, then we have to create a relationship between that person and that organization. It's the beneficial owner, and so on. So we have a handful of APIs that all of us can explore mainly in here. We can start with the parties. In the demo, we're going to be covering mainly the get persons, but we just talked about creating a person, right? A quick header that idempotency is an important aspect to all APIs, right? So we don't repeat and create issues by repeating the same code. But for the demo, I want to keep in mind the servicer ID. This is that routing layer that Kent showed us earlier. Depending on that servicer ID header, we will know to which core we want to go to. And then we have a set of fields that will be required to create the person. Feel free to explore those. The other thing that I want all to be doing in the meantime is either have Postman downloaded from a link that we have in that GitHub repo here. And hopefully you already have it, so it will be a bit quicker. And for that, then download the actual Postman collection and load it in your Postman. So let's take a minute here. That can take a minute to download if the speed is not too fast and you don't have Postman yet. Any questions up to this point? Okay. Everybody had Postman? Anybody needs help downloading Postman or downloading the collection? Okay.
And then maybe just show, if someone hasn't done this, how to import the collection. You just click the import button.
Yeah. Yeah, so once you have downloaded Postman and have downloaded the collection, we can go through the import button here on our screen, navigate to files.
Almost.
Yeah, it can take a minute. And keep those cards ready. We're going to be using that first name and last name in a second. Anybody needs a look? Everybody's set? I can help anybody? Okay. Okay. So basically, it should look something like this. I have pre-wired most of it in the form of collection variables that we're going to be using here, as well as the OAuth credentials. So for this part, the next couple of steps, let's make sure that everybody follows. So click on the collection name, click on the authorization tab, and scroll all the way down to get a new access token. Click proceed, click use token. This is essential. So everybody's with me on that one?
I'm still with the Postman thing. I'm at this part right here. Okay, I got it installed and I'm logged into it. What did I miss?
Okay.
This is just Postman.
And you don't go up to scroll down a bit
This one
in the repo.
in the repo. Because I clone this or do this.
Yes, so now have to download the file itself. So you downloaded Postman, now you need the Postman collection.
Right.
And this one is already in your downloads folder? Is in your computer?
I don't think so.
Click on it. You can click right here.
Now when I open it, do I?
No, just save it. And then remember where you're saving it so you can,
Okay, downloads.
yeah, that should work.
Okay.
Then in Postman,
Where's Postman?
okay. So is this in the browser? Click workspaces. Let's create a new one. Oops, sorry. I think you have my workspace. Click my workspace. Now import and navigate to that download folder. Files.
Okay, I see it now.
Oh,
Okay, select files. It's just one file, right?
Yes, just the one.
Download.
Yes,
Thank you.
that should be it.
That one?
Yeah, that's the one. And then expand all the way. And then at the top level,
Right there or right there?
yeah, there. Then the authorization tab. And scroll all the way down. And get new access token. No,
Get new access token.
Proceed. And use token.
She's having something weird.
It says error invalid clients. The default state had no name here, so I can remove that. But it just gives me that. I tried the clear cookies as well, but
After you download it, do you modify anything at all?
this is default state. Yeah.
Mhm.
I haven't touched anything.
Yeah, that's right. Correct. Oh. And have you look around? Everybody's okay?
At least a few people have got it working.
Yeah, she did get it working.
I can try re-importing it if you think something's up. I haven't tried that yet.
And which branch? Main branch.
I used, I just downloaded the raw file.
Yeah, so she went just so
I
far.
just hit download, yeah.
That's what I did? That's what she did as well.
I'll try it again.
Up to now, everybody has the token. We're able to obtain a token. It's ground zero. Good, looking good? Okay.
Still the same. Am I the only one with this error?
Sounds like it.
Maybe a version date? Is it like an older version
It could be. It's been
of Postman or something?
Postman. It's been about a month since my last update.
Shouldn't.
It's fairly fresh, yeah.
Yeah, no, that shouldn't be it.
Everything looks right. Yeah, well, those are the credentials. It's operator, 44 CD. Wow. Should we update your Postman real quick?
Okay, I can try.
What are you gonna do?
Update Postman.
Update.
We should probably keep
Yeah.
Sorry.
Let's keep that. Okay. The second step that is critical, and we are going to use that card that we share, is after everybody has obtained the token, let's click on the first request. Here, let's take a look at the query parameters in the URL. We have first name and last name, so please plug in your card's first name and last name.
Where is that? On the card. But you typed it in. Okay, you typed it in.
Don't worry, everybody has the same social security number. Yeah, Postman is, I'm not going to advertise them, but there's a lot of data generation tools, random. They do not dare to touch random SSN generation. But names, addresses, job titles, all of that can be randomly generated by Postman. And maybe a month ago, they recently have a performance feature. So in the past, we used to leverage JMeter for all of that. JMeter is kind of the standard. And Postman is introducing some features, so kind of a poor man version of it, but it's getting there. I think right now you could send 100 virtual users at the same time, but yeah, most likely you're gonna have to go back to JMeter for that. Okay, so everybody was able to retrieve the details for their person. Anybody need help with that one? Please say that again.
I have created the person.
Oh, somebody got ahead. Do you have a card like this? And try the first name and last name on the query parameters on this first request, on the first get. Okay, so this is all kind of wired up from this point on, so you can click one at a time and see what's happening. There's some scripts behind the scenes grabbing that person ID, for example, and loading it into a collection variable. So now when we go to the next request, that person ID will have been already pre-populated. So we can check if that person has an account. Hopefully everybody here should have an account. And most importantly, everybody should have $10,000 to spend today. Okay, everybody up to there following? Were you able to find your person?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Same thing. So for that person, we wired some scripts so we can obtain that account ID and load it into an X. So now we can obtain details on that person's account. In this case, Postman auto-generated a name for that account as a home loan account. All of you might have something slightly different. And yeah, this should be our fun money for today. Everybody should have $10,000 when we check our balances. Yeah, we were doing some initial testing here. So maybe I can take a second here to show why Orca helps to unify. Different cores call their balances different things. Some cores have what we like to call an overnight settlement process. Some of them are in more instant payments, so to speak. In Nova, we have 4 types of balances. We have available, blocked, pending, and current. In CSI, for example, they call it memo balance. And that balance, even though it's instant, the available and current balance wouldn't settle until the next day. So there are some differences in the way that cores perform their operations, but at the end of the day, Orca is helping anybody in the fintech world trying to unify the behavior of all cores with what we understand is friendly terms like available, blocked, pending, and current. Okay, and if you guys were not happy with $10,000, that was not enough. Now we can perform a deposit and get some more. So don't go crazy, but buy yourselves an ice cream at least. Same thing, withdraw. Here, maybe we can just, just $1. So let's see. We added 5. We withdraw 1, so that should be a +4. So if we were to run these get balances again, we will have a +4, right? So 9,954. Then we have the get account transactions. Same thing, already pre-wired for that account number. And this should have a list of those transactions that have been performed. with details of whether it's a debit or a credit, and so on. Most likely, the very first transaction is going to be the initial funding with those $10,000. And then there's one last request here that I wanted you to take a look. This is just for the purpose of the lab. Everybody that has a card will be able to find a person via the lab. So we live in this fictitious town called Lab for today. Later on during the demo in the UI, Ken will show you that you can send money to your fellow fictitious friends. And maybe at the end of the day, we can check who has the most money. We'll see. So up to there, we have exercised the main operations from Orca that we're going to be exercising from the Pay Now app that Ken has been describing. There is one last request here that I wanted to point out. And it's just so you're aware that we are keeping in mind security, keeping in mind locking down order operations best as we can. We're using OAuth 2. In this case, the token for this operation does not have the corresponding role. So for that, we could take a quick look. And this is a utility request here. This is the same thing that is being used behind the scenes in the Postman collection to obtain a token. So if you were to take a look at what's happening in there, you will find claims for, in this case, it's an operator, so that's why he cannot create an account or create a person, etc. For that, we have special admin, but this is all configurable. Just making sure that we keep security in mind. Okay.
Yeah, just demonstrating that with Keycloak, with OAuth 2, we can give role-based access to different endpoints in the API.
Yeah, this is all backed by open source tools. Keycloak the main driver, and all of it can still be secure via our open source stack. Let's see. Okay, any questions with Postman before we moved into the? Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I want to ask, at present, you were limiting scopes to a banking ID based on OAuth, or are you going to just, somebody can have a token with all scopes for all banks? Is that something that can be done?
It can be done. It's all about the use case.
It's all about the use case.
Yeah.
Okay. So that becomes scary because you can update anything mistake right.
Yeah.
Just
No,
based on OAuth,
yeah.
It's for the caller to make sure they're doing the right thing.
No, we Mambu and a lot of sandboxes are 100% sandbox that are not even attached to a client. These are like demo sandboxes. And sometimes for development purposes, as a developer, right, we want to have no bottlenecks, so we might give ourselves all the scopes. So yeah.
That's why I was talking about all the scopes and how they're segregated. It's
Yeah.
already open right now. Okay.
Yeah. There are, security, and so that's
So
a.
that fine-grained control is there. You can get it with fine-grained.
Okay. So we have covered the API documentation. We have covered the Postman collection. The next thing that I want to take a look, it's our Mambu connector. So everybody can follow as well. You can, maybe let me show that link. So in the repo that we all obtained the Postman collection from, there are some links here to our Mambu connector implementing the Orca interface. There's a couple of files here that I wanted to take a look because they're part of the way that we build our applications, our connectors in Camel. We do follow a top-bottom approach. So for that purpose, the first file we're going to be looking at is our Swagger. It is Open API, as all of you know by now, but Swagger still sticks, right? So the one operation that I want to take a look here is the create person. Please take a look here. In this case, the operation ID itself is called create person. Keep that in mind, or it's going to come back in 30 seconds. So going back, top-bottom approach. We start with our Swagger, and we use a Camel plugin that based on that Swagger, actually right here, that based on that Swagger will generate DTOs for us. So what are DTOs? So following design patterns, a data transfer object, basically Java, pollos. And the idea here is to leverage them from our Apache Camel routes themselves and limit the back and forth. Best practices around DTOs: don't have one for each thing, don't have one for everything, find your middle ground, understand your data model and make sure that you have a good balance on those. In this case, they are driven by our Swagger, so the key here is to make sure that our Swagger is following the right approaches and sticking to what it needs to do. Okay, the next thing that I want to show itself is let's jump into our create person route. And the reason I ask all of you to take a look at that operation ID is because this is the way that Camel wires or forwards any request that is received by your application. So in this case, our operation ID was create person. The main unit of work that we're going to see in Camel, you're going to hear that term everywhere. A route this, a route that. Think of them as methods or functions. You can also organize your files containing your routes in a way that makes sense to your domain or your endpoints in your Swagger. In this case, there is one, so there are two instructions here that I also want to take a look at. Number one, we have wired the navigation from a payload into application going into the route. This is declared with the from URI. And when we want to call another method, that's when we will do a to URI. Apache Camel has a lot of what we call DSLs, domain-specific languages. The most common ones are Java and XML. Today we're seeing XML. There's another one, there's maybe 8 of them, but the third one that I would like to mention today is YAML. And the reason I want to mention that one is to keep it in your mind because there's a lot of UI initiatives that are based on YAML. So if you have your routes in XML or Java, you might have to port them to YAML, so then you can use these plugins. These plugins are open source, but they're just getting kicked off, so they're not ready for production. But once those are ready, they will compete with commercial solutions in the integration space that are drag and drop. So keep an eye to the YAML DSL when implementing routes, because, or keep in mind how to migrate them from XML or Java to YAML, because that could be coming up. Camel is ever growing and ever expanding. I have been in integration space for 11, 12 years. Back then, it used to be more SOAP-based, XML-based. Nowadays, it's, thank God, REST APIs, JSONs. With that in mind, I think I'm hoping that Camel catches up and we don't have to ever look back to those commercial options. Just last week, maybe 2 weeks ago, Camel 4 was officially released, the LTS version. And of note, there are many things happening there, but of note is that Spring 6, Spring Boot 3, X, both of them are going to be supported by Camel 4. So things like the Gravel VM with native compilation for improving the memory's footprints, faster upload starts. So all of that is unlocked as of last week, thanks to the new release of Apache Camel 4.0. So we do love Apache Camel, so I think it's definitely worth a try. Okay, so going back to our route, so we're creating a person here. There's a couple of things I want to point out. In this case, we are doing the first thing that we did in our Postman collection, and that is getting ready to obtain a token. In this case, well, actually, for Mambo, we just have to pass an encoded, yeah. So if you ever need to expand a Camel route with Java code, right? As Java developers, we always go back to our Java toolkit. So in this case, encode out header is actually a Java class. So let's take a quick look at that one. So there's not much happening here, but it's authorization, right? So in this case, we're setting a header, the authorization header, and we're basically base 64 encoding the combination of a username and a password. Camel uses an application YAML to keep these secrets. We do not keep, as a best practice, we do not keep the real secrets or try to not keep any secret in GitHub. For that, we rely on, in this case, AWS parameter store, but there are other number of secure ways to keep secrets. And them, along with Helm charts and values files, we plug in those at the time to deploy to via Kubernetes. So in this case, we're basically setting the header, encoding the header, base64 encoded. That has been added to the message here. And we're ready to make the call down to Mambo. There are 3 things happening here. And here is what I'm going to introduce you to something called Data Sonnet. Back in the SOAP and XML days, there was a transformation language called XSLT that a lot of you still have pain in your eyes and are shaking your heads, right? So modern times are here. We have JSON. And for that, we have Data Sonnet. Data Sonnet is JSON-based. It looks like this. So you will be, let me just connect the dots here. So here we're setting the body that we're going to send to the core, in this case, Mambo. And for that, we're creating the person request. once that is set, then we are going to call the actual Mambo endpoint, which is a post, HTTP verb post. Okay, so in here, this is mostly JavaScript. We're basically creating a lot of local variables and slowly making sure that we have values for them. So this is closer to JavaScript than to Java, but as we know, both of them have similar grammar. And after we load all those variables, then at the end, we put them together in a wrapper of a prune. So DataSonnet builds on JSONet. JSONet has some standard libraries, a lot of functionality, and that can be accessed via the standard library utility. Here in this case, we have prune. Prune basically will take a look at the resulting payload, and if there's a field that is null or empty, it will remove it from the payload. So after we have put together all those local variables, here at the end, we're putting together the final payload. We will be sending things expected, like name, last name, middle name, addresses, and so on. And then we do have, this is actually a good point, going back to the Apache Camel route semantics. This is the way you declare or define a route, right? This way somebody can call you. We talk about the specific way this is being called by wiring the operation ID in the Swagger. But within routes in Camel, we can call another routes. And in this case, we are doing that at line 305. We're calling a separate route. In this case, is our Open API response validator to make sure that that response from Mambo adheres to, is a valid REST API message. So these routes had a couple of things of note. How we define a route, how we set headers, how we set properties. Properties are like variables in your camel route in memory. Also, how you call a Java processor, in this case, encoding an auth header that we saw how we set the authorization header. Finally, how to make use of DataSonnet to set up a payload to the core to Mambo. And finally, we have another response building up, another DataSonnet building up the response. So with that, we have done a walkthrough of the main functionality. Another two things that I want to mention here is always have automated testing. We also use JUnit 5 for unit test, and we love Cucumber. We use Cucumber for, well, I hope everybody knows what is Cucumber. Cucumber is a framework. They use it for, they call it BDD, Behavior-Driven Development. In our case, it's more for functional testing. Think of it as a black box. And the reason we like Cucumber is that it has a language called Gherkin that is very user-friendly. And while JUnit tests, we like it for developers to be taking care of specifics. When you look at the connector, sometimes you have, I'm not going to say the CEO of a company, but sometimes you have business analysts or people that are not developers themselves. And when they look at Gherkin, they feel at home. It's very clear to understand. And in the same way, the report of running Cucumber tests is in Gherkin language. So highly recommend that combination of JUnit with Cucumber tests. I hope that everybody was able to follow along. Any questions with any of the code that we have covered? Yeah.
So you showed us how you integrated with Moov, which is probably like very good documentation. But what about core system like Henry or other core system that is less documentation like Moov? How did you achieve that? And another question is, how did you overcome the problem that different banks use different fields in the core system? So you probably need to map them differently, and it's not scalable. How did you manage to do that?
It's hard work. You dig it out of the dirt. I mean, is the real answer.
Yeah, that's where the real elbow grease goes in. Every single engagement will be different. Every single bank will be different. Even two different banks using the exact same core might use it in a different way. We are not the core owners, right? The core owner is the bank that is our client. And they have their own way to also give you access to their systems or to their documentation. So via their relationship, sometimes you can facilitate access to the documentation. Sometimes they have in-house experts. So depending on the project, you have to navigate how to obtain those answers. Think of it of OVA as your canonical data model. To your answer about the fields, question about the fields. So we always want to go from your fintech to the OVA model to the core. So there's mapping on both sides. And as anything that will allow you to swap either the client or the core. So.
Okay, yep. And yeah, so that is hard work is the short answer. You have to dig it out from their docs or trial and error sometimes. That's the painful part. And that's why we really focus on making that reusable once we've built those connectors, doing it. So at least the front end is consistent so that the fintech can consume a single API.
You have a starting point, right? Even between cores, you have even if they're very different data sets connected to sort of like 2 or 3 times, you still have a place to start.
Right. Once we started that core, yeah, I think the connection can be consistent, like, on a particular, let's say FIS or Fiserv. Sometimes even there it can be different. But at least, yeah, so we have a data analysis team that, really looks hard and compares to ISO 20022 and FDX and all the cores and is trying to bring order out of the chaos. So that's a lot of work. But,
And there are cores like Scimitar that they have the concept of tracking records. So when you have something that is custom, that's completely right. Like now you have to figure out, there might be like out of the box feel for it, but the bank using it might not know it and they create a custom record for it. So there's always exceptions, and that's where feature flags and other tools might come in place.
okay, so I'll just give a quick update here. So we've been through everything down to this one, is what we just did. So I'm going to show just a little bit about some of the config. We won't go too deep on this, but this is how you deploy into Kubernetes, and then I'll show you the app, and then we'll actually send money back and forth. And then we'll leave. There should be time for more Q&A. I just want to get through what we have planned first. So again, it's the GitOps model that I mentioned, and so this is a GitOps repo. It's just in GitHub, and basically they're Helm charts. I don't know if people know Helm charts, but it's just a way of kind of wrapping around a particular container that's going to be deployed and what are the environment variables and things that can be passed in. And then in deployments, this is where we basically tell Argo, use this Helm chart, deploy this container with, let's say, this many instances and this much memory and that kind of thing. So I'll just touch on a couple things. So the ones we're going to deploy are already deployed. There's that process API, and then there's the one that goes to CSI here. And again, like, I won't show much, but like a Helm chart that one's pretty simple, but then we organize things so there's a values file. This is where you kind of go and configure. So I'm going to jump down to the bottom. This is how we configure Istio for that roles-based permission, right? So we've put rules in here that says allow, and you'll see here, if you're admin, then you can go to everything. If you're an operator, then you only get less. So that's how you basically the claims are handled by Keycloak, but then Istio is the one that's saying based on that claim you get access or don't to particular endpoints. Does that make sense? So again, I can't train everybody on Istio. It's pretty powerful and complex, but everything's here, and we've kind of organized these value files where once we've got those templates, it's pretty easy to create a new API, change what you need to change, and deploy. Trying to think if there's anything else.
That's where you have also the secrets that might be in AWS parameter store. So that's how you plug them into the Camel application.
And then we also just kind of, sorry, I'm jumping around here. We organized into this tags file. So once things are there, we have a single place where when you update, rebuild a container and just want to sort of have a manifest to say, here are all the containers and what's the version that should be in production right now. So that's all here. So then basically when you, and I'm not going to demo that because it'd take a few minutes to go, but when you make a change either on that, like change the value of a particular build of a particular container or make changes to the config, Argo, once you commit that, Argo notices that. And so this is the UI for Argo. And you can see all the applications here, the 4 applications. We actually deploy the UI itself. We tend to follow a single page application model. We just package those files in a Docker container and serve them up sort of as a file server. So it's in the same domain. It's easy to secure. So yeah, here's the CSI, here's the Mambu, here's the actual application itself, and we'll look at that in a second. And then here's that routing API. So if I go into a particular one, you can see the health, you can kind of see all the pods, all the instances running. You can even go in and do sort of a live tail and see, let's see if I go to logs, you'd be able to see if we're all running. Yeah, so that's some handy debugging. The way we're getting access to that is through a tool called Tailscale, and there is an open source version, and then as you scale up, they make you pay a certain amount. But Tailscale is giving us a low level, it's like a WireGuard VPN into the cluster. So that's how we're able to run and actually look at the cluster, get quite a bit of information on what's running there. The other piece is Grafana, so just do a little bit there. So we picked on that particular container, said any line that contains labs, and I'll just go for the past, I'll say past 3 hours. As you can see, I don't know how many people actually succeeded. I think we had a peak there where you guys were doing it. And then some of the features, you can see the logs at excruciating detail. One of the things that's really good is the traces. Anybody familiar with OpenTelemetry and distributed tracing? So you get, it's a fairly new feature, and it's just basically by plugging that to Camel, it's instrumented fairly simply, and it's just streaming that out. And so you can see that the API call came into the process API. There was some internal routing, and then it went out to Mambu and responded back. And the kind of things you can see here is, the time spent. Is actually the core is the main thing. So you can see how much time your API is taking versus the core. If there are errors, you can track them easily. And then you can also see things like cluster health, like how much capacity do I have left. You can go down here and look at, probably this is when you guys were, let me just refresh that to make sense, but when people were running, you'll see that we had some more peak load right there. There are actually even more. You can build dashboards and do quite a bit. So that's how to deploy. We're working in the long run on some low-code tooling over that, but for now, this is the open source roll up your sleeves model. It's pretty straightforward once you learn how to do it. And then the other, I just wanted to switch and look at the user interface code as well. Let's see, let me just show the app, and then we're gonna, and then I'll show the code real quick, and then I'll let you guys go in there and run it. So I'm gonna do an incognito so I can sign in. I'm gonna show that, I'm gonna log in, actually get you to log in. We're gonna go in with, we've got Keycloak running and all your accounts are in Keycloak. We've also federated in our account, so he's gonna get single sign-on with Google. Here, you want to come? Did I spell it right?
Don't you need fintech here? Fintech and Austin.
Oh, wait, yes, good point. I need to go here. No, it is the fintech. There you go. Running on his laptop, I don't know his password. Okay, so he's going to get two-step verification. So again, this is just to show this, answer some of the security questions that, and this is all pretty straightforward with Keycloak.
Yes.
Okay, so then I'm going to fill this one out using that same Shannon Wen.
Oh, first name.
So that's the fake account that we were using to test. So this is going to connect in and show. So each person has two accounts, one in bank, the CSI bank, one in the Moov bank. As you've seen, we tested a little bit already, so the Moov bank is down a little bit. Now, if I wanted to send money, I just say, okay, let's say I'll take it out of Moov, and I'm going to send it to, I don't know if anybody in here got Joaquin Lindgren.
Any names? Who wants money? Give us a name.
Gotcha. Oh, error, trying to transfer money. That's what. So here you can see you got 1,000 in your Moov account. Deposit it. Let me just see. Okay, so I sent $1,000. I don't know what happened that time. So anyway, that's how the app works. Obviously, it's pretty simple. I could go into the token and show that the reason I'm able to call this app is because I have that operator role. I'm not going to jump into there. So I'm going to close that for a second and then just shows a little bit of the code. So this is built in React as a single-page application. If we go down to pages, so the home page is here.
Is it sitting directly on PortX?
What's that?
Is it sitting directly on PortX?
It's in one of our demo accounts. It's been deployed into a cluster running there. So you can look at the code. We were going to run it off of Code Sandbox, but it was flaky. So anyway, you can see here it's built out in React. And then, let's see if I look at main. You can see this is wrapped. The way we're doing security, the login is it's wrapped in this auth provider, which is a component coming from a third party. Sorry, where is the it's coming from a third-party component. You can see that the app TSK. This is how it's doing that. It's because that component's there. It's just saying is authenticated. If it's not, it says go sign in redirect, and so that's just redirecting. You can see how the APIs work. Basically, this this code is just basically building out headers and a method similar to what you saw Camel do, but this is in JavaScript, and then calling that base URL, and then we've got hooks in here for responding and updating data in the UI. So I'll let you look around at the code, but this is pretty straightforward React code, and just showing how we call APIs, how we do the authorization and pass those tokens into customers. So yeah, with that, I'll just demo how you should log in, which is it's there in the sheet, but I'll just do it as well. So I'm going in incognito. You don't have to do that, but if you've logged in once, it's just an easy way to make sure that's fresh. So basically, we all have the same username, so you're going to say fintech devcon, and then it's just capital A Austin. (2023). And so that's going to log in, and again, you're going to enter the name on your card. And be able to log in if I typed it right. Cool. So I guess go around and convince people about your startup and get them to send you money. Whoever gets the most money wins. And so while you're playing with that, we can just have Q&A if there are any more questions.
Questions can come from your seats or are welcome to step here.
Yes?
Yeah, how are you guys dealing with banks that protect their core through their own layer of API? Maybe they have some stuff they do with the data before they send it to the core.
We do have some of those, and in the past that was part of our business. We help people do that kind of thing, and so that'd just be another layer we'd have to translate into.
So it'd be a custom XML layer or Camel layer that you guys create? For
Yeah,
a
we would.
specific partner?
Yeah, I mean, we would encourage them for the efficiency. Like, it depends if that's really needed, because if we can just drop in a connector we've built and then the fintech can do it, we'd prefer that. But if they force it and are willing to pay for it, we'll do the custom work, or they would do the custom work to map between whatever layer they have to what we need. Yes?
Have you had to try to integrate with multiple cores at a single bank?
We do have some banks that have multiple cores. I'm trying to think if we've done this exact model yet. I'm not sure, but we could, with the same routing, we'd be able to distinguish, because basically that routing layer in the header tells which bank, but if there are multiple, as long as those two were unique, we'd be able to hit a different URL. We'd need if it's a different kind of core, we'd need the connector for each of them running.
That scenario is more common with fintechs. They're the ones that usually have to go to multiple cores. Banks are usually...
No, but we do. It depends. The straightforward banks, just regular retail bank, they typically will have a single core, but sometimes they've bought up several. But we also work with a lot of the sponsor banks where they're doing fintech stuff and FBO accounts, and yeah, it is fairly common that we'll have multiple. But you'd have to treat each of them independent.
Is there any queuing for reversals and anything? Let's say you're updating some account transfer or something, and errors happen or something. So do you queue messages, or what about timely delivery or something? Or is it only for the person calling the API?
Usually that layer could be in front of theirs, right? If there's queuing. We do, as you saw, make them idempotent and reversible, so that if we get, and we also, when it's really about money movement, a lot of times we'll use Flowable as a BPM tool so that we can say, well, we did an OFAC check, we looked at a rule, we updated the core, and if that succeeded, we updated the Fed or vice versa. So a lot of times if we have to really make it transactional kind of atomic, we'll use Flowable for that. We didn't get into that here, but it's pretty powerful. And there are other, I forget, there was another one that Flowable came out of. I'm forgetting now, but there's several of those pretty good open source workflow tools. Trying to think anything else interesting to bring up. Well, you guys have been great. Thanks for coming to the first session. Feel free to come up with any other. Oh, yes, we had a question in the back.
In your Helm chart setup, there was a part about, there was, I think something, forgive my words if they're not exactly right, but there was there's a part where you're saying what routes are allowed to be accessed based on conditions.
Right.
And that's, it also uses the JWT itself to set those, I mean, the permissions are set within the JWT, right? So, is that level of security on the routes? You're handling the security for the routes within your DevOps process?
Right. So the approach we've taken is that very little is in the code, except someone asked the question, like if you need to filter data by customer or something like that. But for the most part, with the role-based, we would set up and register that API in Keycloak with, we have a definition that we create for the API, and we would assign it to, we'd have different roles that could be there, right? And then what you saw there wasn't actually in the Helm chart, it was down in the Istio config, and it's calling, they call it a CRD, right? So Istio has a CRD to configure it. So we're basically saying, well, they create what they call a virtual service, which is when you expose an API publicly, and then you say the rules for this virtual service for that API, and it's going to look at the claim and then have rules around that. So it's Istio that's doing that work, but yeah, we do all that outside of the camel code as much as possible. The token would have some other data, so we have other scenarios where that token that comes into the API, it could look at it and further filter, like basically a database query, that's why you'd want to do that. But for the access to the endpoints, we do all that outside the code. Makes your code more portable as well, right? Assuming where you're porting it to has the same options. But.
Good question.
Yeah.
The money movement solutions that you have here is obviously FedNow, so that any international steps that international wires with Swift that these fintechs do through these banks?
Yeah, we're working on that. We're working with a pretty big sponsor bank that's been pushing us, all the standard Fed stuff, FedNow, and we were heavy pursuing Swift, and it's just pushed back. So we expect next year to have Swift as well, and that's a whole nother piece we didn't really talk about. But yeah, we have basically a payment gateway thing where we can expanding number of rails that we're supporting.
JWT, as you know, has additional layers. You can sign them, encrypt them. Like right now, we were just...
That's actually a good point. FTX, if you guys are familiar, has this, they're following a standard called FAPI, or FAPI, which is financial grade API security. And so we're doing, the foundation we showed there can do that. So with basically you do signing the token itself, and so you know that the token's signed by someone trusted, so it's just another layer of security. We didn't demo that today, but it's possible with Keycloak and with that stack. So anybody from Austin, where's the best barbecue place there to go?
Black's is pretty good. It's not too far away.
Which one?
Terry Black's is pretty good.
Ah, so tried one. There's one across the street that wasn't bad. It's something like Metal Works or Iron Works or something. It was decent, but
Valentina's my favorite.
Valentina.
Yeah, it's like 25 minutes out of 7.
Oh, nice,
Tech.
nice. Excellent. Well, good to see you guys. We'll see you around the other sessions. Thanks for coming. Yeah.